So, are there any questions? Yes. He hated Socrates. Okay, we'll see about that. Right? I don't know. I don't know. But remember what he says about the noble morality, about the way that they regard their enemy. Right? So Socrates might be an adversary to Nietzsche's philosophy, but I think Nietzsche himself might have a deep admiration for Socrates. And maybe it's not that apparent if you read section 3 of Problem Socrates, when he calls him ugly and rabble and basically an inbred and all this, right? But wait for that. We're going to get to that in a minute. We still have to deal with this issue of relativism that I think I left off on at the end of class last time. Was Nietzsche a relativist? Did he believe that all knowledge or values were relative? And in a sense, I want to say yes to that question because, well, obviously we talked last time about the noble morality versus the slave morality, and Nietzsche describes these as historical value systems that arose under certain historical conditions. So that sounds a bit like cultural relativism to me. But what was his view on truth, right? Does that mean there is no truth out there? The truth is just completely relative? I don't think that's exactly what he's saying here. And maybe if you did the reading, besides just the section on Socrates, at the very beginning of the reading, Nietzsche uses this metaphor for truth. He asks us to suppose that truth perhaps is a woman. And, it may be kind of hard or difficult to understand exactly what's going on with that metaphor. What is his point? We'll read it here in a minute, and I'll try to at least give you sort of my reading of it. But what do you think? By supposing truth is a woman, what is Nietzsche doing here? What do you think his intention is? Well, truth is a woman. What then? He asked that question at the very beginning of your reading. As opposed to truth being a man? Men lie. Yeah, go ahead. Women are complicated. Okay. Again, with Nietzsche, you gotta have to put your political correctness at the door. So, sure, maybe you're thinking of women are complicated, they're emotional, they're mysterious, we can't figure them out, right? Thinking from the male perspective, right? I think, you might not be completely off from what Nietzsche's got going on here. But what was the sort of the typical view of women before the 19th century, before the 20th century? Well, property, were they intellectual? No, the men were smarter, the women were more emotional, right? They were emotional, so they couldn't think, only men could be really good philosophers, right? And so maybe that's what Nietzsche's got going on here. He wants to sort of invert the hierarchy or something. We've assumed that man is the rational one, that man has truth. Maybe woman does. That might be a reading of this. Who knows? I mean, that's probably the most obvious reading, but let's just read here and see what he has to say. This is in the preface to this Beyond Good and Evil. It's the first page of your handout, and Nietzsche writes, supposing truth is a woman, what then? Are there not grounds for the suspicion that all philosophers, insofar as they were dogmatists, have been very inexpert about women? That the gruesome seriousness, the clumsy obtrusiveness with which they have usually approached truth so far have been very awkward and very improper methods for winning a woman's heart? Well, what is certain is that she has not allowed herself to be won. And today every kind of dogmatism is left standing, dispirited and discouraged, if it is left standing at all. For there are scoffers who claim that it has fallen, that all dogmatism lies on the ground. Even more, that all dogmatism is dying. So, what's he saying here? Suppose truth is a woman, what then? It's pretty fair, as he seems to be saying, that philosophers haven't been able to win a woman's heart. If truth were a woman, then the philosophers haven't been doing a very good job at figuring truth out. They haven't been able to win the woman's heart. What's the problem? Why haven't they been able to do this? Because they were dogmatic. Right? They were dogmatic. Okay, that's what prevents them from winning a woman's heart. So again, leave your political correctness at the door. What do I do if I want to win a woman's heart? Are there any Casanovas in here? Some Don Juans? I need some advice, guys. I have a ladies' man in here. How do I win a woman's heart?
Boom, one in the back.
None of you guys? Are you not going to give me your secrets? Well, maybe, how about the women? help me out. Hold on, let me get something to write on here. What do I do if I want to win a woman's heart? Give her whatever she wants. Flirt with her. Smooth talker.
Yeah, women can talk.
Be sweet. Like I haven't heard all this before.
Oh, that's a good one. She said be honest.
Yeah. Oh, don't be honest.
Please.
Honest when it's necessary.
I want some honest advice. How do I win a woman's heart? I mean, you tell me to be honest.
Body talk. It's like
Body talk? So I'm like, oh, what's up, man?
Oh, you have to learn to dress.
Dress for success?
Yeah.
Is that gonna work for every woman? I mean, if I dress in a three-piece suit, look all professional, that might, I know I've dressed up. It turns the head. Hey, look at that guy, right? Didn't notice me before, but now I got my Armani suit. It's not me they're looking at. It's the perception that they have in their head. Got a suit, must have a job, and not a good job. But again, that might work actually. A suit might work for most, but is it going to work for all women?
no.
Right? Some women don't like that type, They want like the Motley Crue, the whatever, the heroin chic is what they call it, right? The guy with the tattoos and the scrawny and all that. Baby, what's up? Or maybe they want the Vin Diesel type, or maybe they who knows what they want, right? But come on, maybe there is one way to win all women's hearts.
You gotta make yourself believe that you're gonna get them.
It's all you. It's just
It's all in you.
so it's because I'm not confident.
Yes.
That's why.
Yes.
So if I was more confident in myself, I could win any woman's heart.
You have to be more confident in order to get some.
Some girls like the pathetic guys. Some girls like the pathetic guys. No, I've seen it. He's so fragile and frail, and I'm going to protect him or something. Or be the mother figure or something. So you do, but again, I ask the question, is there any one thing or a group of things that I could do, again, let me write this down, to any woman, every single woman.
Love.
Love. So not honest. Tell them what they want to hear.
I told you, you have to talk or you have to let it
Smooth
go.
talker. She agrees with him. You think? So it can't be too sweet. But you don't want to be, okay, so you're the Goldilocks sort of, it's not too much, not too little, just right. Or maybe the Aristotle, the golden mean or something. So what's that with my eyes? How do you use your eyes? But really, I mean, even if do all women want somebody to talk to? That's all they're looking for. So if you can talk to them, then from my experience, then you get in the friend zone. I don't want to be in the friend zone.
You want to be with the friend.
That's a horrible place to be in.
You want the friend with the benefit and work your way up type thing.
Wish they would think that way. That's what they say they want. We have to be friends, but then you get in the friend zone and stay in the friend zone.
No, but as a smooth talker, I mean, you have to learn to talk to us as a woman. Like,
Okay, but how do you talk to somebody as a woman? Is there a way to do that? Or perhaps here's something perhaps we haven't thought of. Perhaps there isn't a way to talk to a woman. There's a way to talk to this woman, or that woman, or this other. That not all women are the same.
you have to know that.
And even maybe the same woman is different at different time. Maybe in one day she wants you to be Mr. Talkative, right? You're so quiet. What are you thinking about? What's on your mind? is hard. Why would I think the same would be true about truth? If I'm looking for all these different truths, there's all these different things that are true, why would I think only one method is necessary to get at all truth? I shouldn't think that, says Nietzsche, right? So maybe this is what he's doing with this metaphor. So suppose truth were like a woman, right? When you try to get a woman, there's all sorts of things you gotta try. You can't just do this one thing. And so why is this dogmatism? Why are they being dogmatic? What does that mean to be dogmatic? And why does that get in the way? What's that? I heard somebody, what does it mean to be dogmatic? To be a dogmatist? Aggressive. Well, dogmatists are typically aggressive or stubborn, but
To just follow, like to just go with the flow.
you just follow a certain dogma, a certain belief system. And so like if I'm Plato, I might be dogmatic. He kind of picks on Plato a lot. I might say, well, to know truth, I have to understand the forms and use dialectic, right? And that's the only way I'll ever get the truth. One method, one type of truth. No, Nietzsche says there's all sorts of different types of truth. There's all sorts of different types of women. And there's all sorts of ways to get at the truths, just like there's different ways to seduce the woman, right? That there isn't sort of one formulaic approach. And that's where the philosophers have gone wrong. They're dogmatists when it comes to truth. Right? Suppose it were a woman, what then? He says. On page 2, he writes, in that first full paragraph, he says, the worst, the most durable, and the most dangerous of all errors so far was a dogmatist's error. Namely, Plato's invention of the pure spirit and the good as such. But now that it is overcome, now that Europe is breathing freely again after this nightmare and can at least enjoy a healthier sleep, we, whose task is wakefulness itself, are the heirs of all that strength which has been fostered by the fight against this error. To be sure, the error meant standing truth on her head and denying perspective, the basic condition of all life, when one spoke of spirit and the good as Plato did. So Plato, at least, he seems to be blaming for the beginning of this error, the philosopher's error, the beginning of dogmatism, the invention of the good as such, right? Plato's form of the good. On the other hand, too, you want to maybe take note in that passage I just read, he also mentions that we gain strength by fighting against this error. So maybe even though it was an error, we benefited from it. Plato made a mistake, but we kept dealing with that mistake in philosophy and science, and we got better science out of it. We got better philosophy out of it. But now we're through this, says Nietzsche. Now we can wake up, and we can start anew, perhaps. Now we can reevaluate all of these errors. And what was the error? Well, it meant denying perspective. Denying perspective, which is a condition of life. If you're alive, you have a perspective, says Nietzsche. And so he's not really a relativist, I would say. Right? I guess the picture that the relativist paints is something like this. I have a bunch of egos or subjectivities just sort of floating around, and they all come up with their own conception of truth and falsity, good and bad, right? So here's this one subjectivity. It thinks that some things are true or false. This one thinks that other things are true and false, and so on and so forth. And obviously, some of these conceptions of truth and falsity are going to resemble one another. They'll look similar, but they're all based on the individual. They just come up with their own idea or conception of truth. There is no absolute truth. There is no objective truth. There's just our view of it, right? And I guess if you replace the S's with C's, and standing for cultures or civilizations, that would be cultural relativism, right? Truth and falsity is a matter of custom, a matter of culture. This I don't think is the picture that Nietzsche wants to paint. For Nietzsche, sure, there's truth out there. There are brute facts. But he's not really a relativist. He's been called a perspectivist, so his philosophy is a perspectivism. There's only one truth, maybe, or there are several truths, and there are some absolute truths, but none of us can see all of them. None of us have this God's eye view where we can see the whole truth. We all have our own perspective, right? So here are all my little egos floating around, and these three on the top, maybe they might see similar aspects or similar angles of the truth. So they might be able to agree on some points, right? This guy right here and this guy right here, they pretty much see this whole side of the truth. And so for them, the world looks pretty similar, right? But if I'm over here and this other person's over there, we might never see eye to eye, right? It's almost like, didn't I go over that example last time with the lambs and the eagles? No? Yeah. When we're going to the noble to slave morality, right? If I'm the eagle and I have this certain physiology, I have these, these characteristics, like I have these sharp claws, this eyesight, I'm a predator. I'm never going to see the world the way that the maybe lamb sees the world, right? And maybe we're kind of here, so we can kind of see both sides. Oh, I can see the eagles. I see why they see the world the way they do. I see the lambs. I can see where they're coming from. But we can't forget that we ourselves have our own perspective, so perhaps we are forced to see the truth in a certain way. The mistake of the philosopher, what makes them dogmatic, they assume that they have the view of it all, right? They're able to see everything from all angles, right? And we never can, says Nietzsche. As long as we live, as long as we're alive, we have a perspective. And this is all we know is life. Has anybody died before? Well, they died, but they never came back to tell the tale. At least Nietzsche says they haven't, right? And he also, here in part one of Beyond Good and Evil, he questions whether or not we really want truth. Why do philosophers think truth is so valuable that it's worth everything? Maybe we don't want truth. Maybe we want ignorance. Maybe we want lies, he says. Now, when Nietzsche says that we might want lies, or when he says stuff like lies are more important than truth, remember that when he uses the word lie, he's talking about things like Kant's categorical imperative, or synthetic a priori judgments, or Newton's physics. These are lies, perhaps. They're not really absolute truths, but they're useful lies. They help us, right? They make us more interesting culturally, but they also might furnish us with good science or something like that, even if they aren't 100% verifiable, or even if, who knows, maybe 100 years from now, scientists will be looking back and laughing at our theories, right? Oh my God, they believed in atoms? We have things called crystallatoms, and that's so much more like what really is happening, whatever, right? But he says, who cares? They're useful lies, right? So why be so preoccupied with the truth and nothing but? And here's where he uses the story of Oedipus, another use of metaphor and symbolism to try to get his point across. Let's read here at the beginning of part one of Beyond Good and Evil, where he talks about the will to truth, right? We have this will, this urge, this movement of our spirit towards truth. We feel like we have to get it. But he says, the will to truth, which will still tempt us to many a venture, that famous truthfulness of which all philosophers so far have spoken with respect. What questions has this will to truth not laid before us? What strange, wicked, questionable questions? That's a long story even now, and yet it seems as if it had scarcely begun. Is it any wonder that we should finally become suspicious? That we should lose patience and turn away impatiently? That we should finally learn from the Sphinx to ask questions? Who is it really that puts questions to us here? What in us really wants truth? Indeed, we came to a long halt at the question about the cause of this will. What causes my urge to truth? Until we finally came to a complete stop before a still more basic question. We asked about the value of this will. Suppose we want truth. Why not rather untruth? Uncertainty, even ignorance. The problem of the value of truth came before us, or was it we who came before the problem? Who of us is Oedipus here? Who is the Sphinx? It's a rendezvous, it seems, of questions and question marks. And though it scarcely seems credible, it finally almost seems to us as if the problem had never been put so far, as if we were the first to see it, to fix it with our eyes, and to risk it. For indeed it does involve a risk, and perhaps there is none greater. So it's a risk to go seeking truth. This will to truth is risky. Who is Oedipus? Who is the Sphinx? Why does he ask these questions? Why does he had a big scuffle on the road with the caravan and got in a fight and killed a few people. And then he gets to Thebes and the Sphinx is there. The Sphinx has been there for a while and won't let anybody in unless they can solve the riddle of the Sphinx. And Oedipus does. He solves the riddle. So the Sphinx goes away, and everybody in Thebes is like, geez, you solved the riddle, you get to marry our queen, right? Our king is gone, he's left, we don't know where he's been, he doesn't come back. So Oedipus, why don't you marry our queen? We like you, you're a hero, you got rid of that nasty Sphinx. And he's like, cool, all right, sure, I'll be the king, okay. So he marries the queen of Thebes. They have a very wonderful wedding and a wonderful marriage, and they have children, and they're so happy. And everybody loves Oedipus. He's such a good king. But then something happens. There's some pestilence. Well, it's fate is usually how it's explained. But basically, right, so I'll get to that in the end. Basically, the town starts to get sick, right? There's pestilence, all these flies show up, and there's disease. And so Oedipus is thinking, geez, something's wrong. The gods are angry for something. I don't know what, but I got to figure this out. And so he tries to figure out what the truth is. There's that will to truth. I've got to figure out what the truth is. And he finds out what the truth is and why the gods are angry. And what is the truth? Why are they angry? He married his mother unknowingly, and he had children with her. And he killed his father. The person killed on the road to Thebes was his father. Well, he was told when he was born, and his father was told when he was born that he's like, your son's going to kill you. So his father sent him away to far off land, and basically he was raised telling you're going to kill your father. So he didn't know who his father was though. He didn't know who he was, and of course they hadn't seen him since he was a baby, so it's not like they recognized him when he shows up. But he finds out, I killed my father, I married my mother. What does Oedipus do when he finds this out? What's that? Well, it depends on which version of the story. Some say he was in exile in Colonus, some say he stays in Thebes. But what does he do to himself, though? He tears his own eyes out. So, how did the truth work out for old Oedipus? Not good at all, right? So perhaps we should sort of think twice about whether the truth is so valuable or not, right? Perhaps it won't, right? Perhaps the truth will crush you, I think is what Nietzsche is saying. Perhaps the truth could possibly crush you. So it's not uncontroversially a good thing, I guess, is sort of what Nietzsche is trying to say. That all the philosophers assume that truth is what we want. Truth is completely credible, and who would not want truth? Nietzsche says, well, maybe some people don't. Maybe some people need lies. Maybe if they actually faced up to reality, it would overwhelm them. It would crush them, perhaps Nietzsche would say, right? So there you go. Well, let's go ahead and get to this problem of Socrates now that we've talked about perspectivism. Let's see what he has to say for poor Socrates. So this is all taken from one of his later books, The Twilight of the Idols, and so it's the section called The Problem of Socrates. Let's just go ahead and we'll read this first passage, this first section here, and see what's he got going on here. He doesn't really mention Socrates by name in the first passage, in the first section. This should be right in the middle of your handout, so kind of halfway through. And Nietzsche writes, in every age the wisest have passed the identical judgment on life. It is worthless. Everywhere and always their mouths have uttered the same sound, a sound full of doubt, full of melancholy, full of wariness with life, full of opposition to life. Even Socrates said as he died, to live, that means to be a long time sick. I owe a cop to the slave here, Asclepius. Even Socrates had enough of it. But what does that prove? What does it point to? Formerly, one would have said, no, they did say, loudly enough, are pessimists most of all. Here, at any rate, there must be something true. The consensus sapientium is proof of the truth. Right? The consensus of the wise, of the learned, is proof of the truth. Shall we speak this way today? Are we allowed to do so? Here, at any rate, there must be something sick. This is our reply. One ought to take a closer look at them, these wisest of every age. Were they all of them perhaps no longer steady on their legs, belated, tottery, decadent? Does wisdom perhaps appear on earth as a raven which is inspired by the smell of carrion? Kind of a morbid image there. What is carrion? Like a rotting corpse, right? So wisdom appears on earth as a raven smelling some dead, rotting flesh. Well, that's not a very flattering image for wisdom, right? But what does he say here in this opening paragraph? What is he saying about the wise of all time, the wise people from all times, all the way back to Socrates, the learned? They all have the same judgment concerning life. What is that judgment? When they look at life, what do they say?
They don't appreciate it.
It's worthless, right? Life sucks. And so, how has that typically been interpreted historically? All the wise people say that life is worthless. All the really learned people and wise people say it's worthless. So therefore, what's that? That's what it is. There's a better life waiting for us, but life itself, I think you said it, or somebody said it over here. Well, what do they say? They say, because the wise people think it's worthless, then life is. Well, yeah, Socrates, it was a sickness, right? Basically, we say they must be right. If all the wise people agree, they're all wise, they all say life is worthless, so therefore, life must be worthless, right? They must be right. They're smart, right? Smarter than me, so they must be right. So that's how we've typically interpreted this. But what does Nietzsche want us to do? How does he want us to interpret it? Not that life is worthless, but... Well, not even that. For him, you can't even really make the movie's having this, the third section, you really can't even make a judgment for or against that's really truthful. But what do you say we should say when we hear the wise people say that life is worthless? We shouldn't just say, oh, well, they're right. That means life is worthless. For him, it doesn't tell us anything about life. It tells us something about them, They themselves must have been sick or something, he says, right? They must have been a little, unsteady on their legs or something like that. They must have been maybe decadent. They overindulged themselves in reason or something. I don't know. But again, this judgment doesn't prove anything about life. It just says something about how they see life, maybe about their perspective, right, where they're coming from, how they're seeing that world around them, right? So maybe they were no longer steady on their legs. Second section, he says, this irreverent notion that the great sages are declining types first dawned on me in regard to just the case in which the learned and the unlearned prejudice is most strongly opposed to it. I recognize Socrates and Plato as symptoms of decay. Right? That's, I think, what makes his notion so irreverent. Plato and particularly Socrates, they're kind of like, it's almost like the Jesus of philosophy. You don't criticize Socrates. He was like the guy, he was the man, he was the philosopher, right? So when you call him a declining type, or he must have been sick or something, that's pretty irreverent. But Nietzsche says, this is what I see when I read Socrates, when I read Plato. There's symptoms of decay. They are agents of the dissolution of Greece. They are pseudo-Greek. They're anti-Greek. He says that consensus sapientium, that consensus of the wise, I saw more and more clearly. It proves, least of all, that they were right about what they were in accord over. It proves rather that they themselves, these wisest men, were in some way in physiological accord, since they had to stand in the same negative relation to life. What does he mean when he says that all these wise men had to be in physiological accord? What does that mean? Physiological, so it had to do with the body.
That would be a reason why they were so negative about life.
Right. And he's tracing it to their physiology, partly, right? They had a physiological accordance. They were in accord. What does that mean?
Together.
Similars, in accordance, together. Right. So they must have had a similar physique or physiology or way of carrying themselves or something, because they all had the same negative attitude, right? Judgments, he says, judgments are stupidities. One must reach out and try to grasp this astonishing finesse, that the value of life cannot be estimated. Not by a living man, because he is a party to the dispute, indeed its very object, and not the judge of it. This judgment cannot be made by a dead man for another reason. I'm trying to be funny there. For a philosopher to see a problem in the value of life constitutes an objection to him, a question mark as to his wisdom, a piece of unwisdom. What? And all these great wise men, they were not only decadents, but they weren't even wise? So what's he saying there about value judgments concerning life? He says they ultimately can't be true. The value of life cannot be estimated. Why can't the value of life be estimated? Well, everybody's got their perspective, right? But you're trying to judge life from the perspective of life, right? Has anybody ever experienced non-life? So it's almost like you're trying to judge, you're trying to be a critic of the play that you're starring. Or it's like the painting trying to tell you what a wonderful painting it is, or something like that. You're a party to the dispute, he says, right? You're living. So really any value of judgment regarding life is always going to be biased towards your own life. And really what alternative is there? Have you ever been non-alive and said, this is better? And that life sucks, I like it better not to be alive? How do you know, right? And you can't make that judgment if you're dead, because you're dead, right? Says Nietzsche, right? So, and he's going to say all that these judgments give us they're symptoms, right? That's what they tell us. When somebody says, I hate life or I love life, it doesn't tell us anything about life. It tells us about them. It's a symptom of their perspective, the way they see the world, maybe their physiology, right? So that's why he's so mean to Socrates. He's got to show you the guy was ugly, so he was bitter, right? It's sort of like, I told you this last time about the young ladies who were these swimsuit models or whatever who got in the fat suits and walked around. No, I was watching TV. It was a couple years ago, and it was one of those hidden camera shows, right? And they took these swimsuit model, beautiful women, every guy would be drooling over them, and they put them in these suits so they look like 400 pounds. It's huge, like that. What's that movie with Jack Black? What is it? Shout How, where they take what's her name, Gwyneth Paltrow, and they make her all, So they did this to these women, beautiful women, and they made them look all unattractive, and they just had them go do things like go shopping or go to the store, and they just couldn't do it after a while. They started crying. They broke down crying because I can't believe how mean people are, right? Because they're so used to having everybody pandering to them, right? They walk into a restaurant, they get the best seat in the house, right? Everybody else is waiting on the list, Oh, we have Madonna, we have I remember there's a funny episode of The Simpsons where Marge gets like a boob job or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
And they go to the restaurant and all the guys are, oh, thank you, man. They're talking to Homer, but they're looking at her boobs, Give her the table even though everybody else is waiting. Oh, it's a 2-hour wait. She walks in with her boobs. Oh, man, we have a table for you right here. I never got that either. I used to work in restaurants a lot, and this always happens. An attractive woman walks in, and I used to wait on, I used to be kind of like, I'd be very, just kind of cold almost, not as friendly as I normally would, because I didn't want to get this idea like I'm just being nice because they're attractive. All these guys in the kitchen, oh, hey man, what's her name? Why don't you ask if she wants something for free? I'll give her some free dessert, I'm like, what do you think she's gonna just get out of her seat and walk back to the dishwashing station? Hey buddy, you gave me a free piece of cheesecake. You want to go out tonight? Maybe just go in this bathroom stall real quick? What are they thinking? And the thing is, I think though too, is that a lot of these women don't really see it. They're so used to it, kind of take it for granted. They think the world's a wonderful, beautiful place where everybody helps you and everybody's so eager to give you free stuff. And every time I have a flat tire, like 12 cars break. They're trying to help me. Here I am on the highway, like sweating and trying to fix my own. Just like, get that guy. Right? So obviously I'm going to have a different perspective, a different outlook on life if I'm the attractive woman. They couldn't handle it. They were like, I can't believe how mean people are. They thought that they were just being nice.
Yeah.
Not because the way I look, they're just nice. People are nice, right? So when he's calling Socrates ugly, I think, sure, maybe there's some low blows in there and stuff, but I think he's also trying to make a point too, right? So in this third section, he says, Socrates belonged in his origins to the lowest orders. Socrates was rabble. One sees for oneself how ugly he was, right? But ugliness, an objection in itself, is among the Greeks almost a refutation. Was Socrates a Greek at all? Ugliness is frequently enough the sign of a thwarted development, a development retarded by interbreeding. So Socrates is an inbred, right? Socrates is an inbred, and he's ugly. Anthropologists tell us that the typical criminal is ugly. Monstrum in fronte, monstrum in animo. Ugly in the face, ugly in the soul, basically. But the criminal is a decadent. Was Socrates a typical criminal? At least the famous physiognomist opinion about Socrates, which his friends found so objectionable, wouldn't contradict this idea. There was a foreigner who was passing through Athens, and he knew how to read faces. He told Socrates to his face that he was a monstrum, that he contained within him every kind of foul vice and lust. And Socrates answered merely, "You know me, sir." So, what's he doing here? Just being a meanie, right? But again, no. Socrates is ugly.
And he's poor too. He said
He's poor, right? That's going to affect the way he sees things. Especially what is he surrounded by? Rich people, right? Attractive too, right? They're all attractive. They all, if you were an upper class Greek, you had to go to the gym every day. It was almost like a religion. You had to go work out. They were all about their looks. They were all about their physique. You've seen the Greek statues, right? Guys are all ripped, the women are just, these hourglass figures. And so here's this short, stubbly, kind of ugly dude. It's like when I go to the dance club, kind of. Young people, attractive people, get out here and go to the pub. But he's going to have this attitude, right, because of these things. So I guess this is instructive. We need to look at these things, right? Skipping that next section, though, right? Now Nietzsche, he starts analyzing really, look, what's got to be going on for somebody like Socrates to have the influence that he had? What was going on in Athens at the time? What was going on in Greece at the time, right? Section 5, with Socrates, Greek taste undergoes a change in favor of dialectics. So Socrates makes them worry more about dialectics than about their wrestling, right? They'd go to the gym and get all awesome and buff and jock-like and wrestle, right? But now it's all, we've got this intellectual competition, dialectics. That's another form of competition that Socrates introduced. But what happens when this takes hold? When dialectics becomes popular? He says it is above all the defeat of a nobler taste. So maybe he's talking the noble morality starting to decline. With dialectics, the rabble gets on top. Before Socrates, the dialectical manner was repudiated in good society. It was regarded as a form of bad manners. One was compromised by it. Young people were warned against it. And all such presentation of one's reasons was regarded with mistrust. Honest things, like honest men, do not carry their reasons exposed in this fashion. It's indecent to display all of one's goods. What has first to have itself proven is of little value. Wherever authority is still part of accepted usage, and one does not give reasons but commands, the dialectician is a kind of buffoon. He's laughed at. He's not taken seriously. Socrates was the buffoon who got himself taken seriously. What was really happening when that occurred, right? What must have been going on in Athens for the buffoon to be taken seriously? Dialectics, Nietzsche says, are a last resort. I only use them when I have to, right? Section 6, one chooses dialectics only when one has no other expedient. You know the dialectics inspire mistrust. They are not very convincing. nothing is easier to expunge than the effect of the dialectician, as is proven by the experience of every speech-making assembly. Dialectics can only be a last-ditch weapon in the hands of those who have no other weapons left. So what does he mean there? That this is proven how ineffective dialectics is by anybody that's ever been to an assembly where speeches were being made. So if you've been to a big rally, a political rally, or maybe like somebody's giving you like one of these, what do they call them, self-help or kind of motivational speaker or whatever, he says that dialectics are not that effective in those situations. Right? And when he's talking about dialectics, he's saying giving rational arguments and reasons and things like that. Is he right?
Sometimes.
I think he kind of is, and I remember reading this and thinking about, this is maybe too long ago for some of you to remember, but when Bush and Gore were debating, when they were running against each other, there was this one point in their debate where they get asked this question about education, right? And Gore goes first, and he's the dialectician. You know, he's like, well, education is a very important issue in our country, and that's why Senator Feinstein and I have come up with this bill, H.R. 3102. And it's a really good bill, because what it does is it takes this percentage of this, and it gives this percentage. It just gets all complicated with this whole, what his plan is, right? And it was a very reasonable, rational, okay, all right, but most people are like halfway through it. What are you talking about? And then they go to Bush, same question. What are you going to do with education? And Bush is like, I really care about our children. I love our children. Our children are the future of America. They're the most important asset that we have in our country. I love our children. And what's really important too is the parents. I wish I could pass a law that says parents do good. Give me that law, I'll pass it. I want parents to do good, and I love children, and I care about our kids. And that's what I'm going to do for education.
So basically, answering on the question, basically explain what he's going to do.
A lot of them answer around the
Well, what's stuck? What's stuck with you?
Senator Feinstein and I are going to do H.R. 3102, and 20% of the educational funds are going to...
You remember that? You remember, I love our kids, I care about our kids, our parents need to be better.
Have you watched Family Guy, the episode where Louis was looking for, wanted to be the...
Which is the
I think I see it.
Oh yeah, you need to watch that.
And they told him to say 9/11.
Yeah, just
Just say 9/11. Like, what's his name? The mayor, Rudy Giuliani.
Yeah.
Right? When he was running for president. Remember 9/11? I was there. It's like, yeah, what else did you do, right? 9/11, remember?
Just
You know what that happened again? 9/11.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of, like, if I was like a family, one of the survivors, I'd be pretty offended by that. What are you using this tragedy for political gain? But it's effective. People, 9/11, they get all emotional. Kill the terrorist, Oh, yeah, I'm tough on terrorists, or whatever, right? Well, how are you tough on them? And what is a terrorist? You know what it is. It's bad evil. Do it. It's just, go get them. Okay, all right. That usually is more effective politically than,
terrorism is defined by this, and technically good.
no, you gotta be all gung-ho, and dialectics are not effective. It's not that Nietzsche's saying one is better than the other. He's just pointing out, you're only going to use dialectics if you have to, right? And maybe the Democrats could learn a lesson from this. I think they too much try to start with dialectics, right? I think that's why the Republicans are so effective is, they're very good at pulling heartstring type thing, right? They come up with words, what is it, you're not pro-choice, right? You're anti-life or whatever. They'll do this sort of, I don't want to be anti-life, and that kind of thing. I think that's, unfortunately, human nature maybe, who knows, but that is more effective. That rhetoric and that type of thing is more effective than what Nietzsche's calling dialectics here.
When we first read Socrates, didn't he explain that he wasn't a dialectic person? I mean, he didn't really
He wasn't doing rhetoric. Socrates, when he talks about dialectic, it's usually in the middle or late period of Plato. So we're not really sure if Socrates himself used that word. And maybe it's more of a technical term that he did in later Plato. But certainly the manner that Socrates went about questioning people, he was trying to analyze these concepts and get to them, right? What is justice? Let's really try to figure this out. Instead of just saying, I love justice, and being justice is good, let's get justice for everybody. without even knowing what it is, right? Socrates, well, wait a minute, let's pick this apart and analyze it. Let's have a more dialectical approach. Let's bounce these ideas off one another. Let's try to find truth, right? Whereas, the other Athenians, the sophists and the aristocrats are like, shut up, we all know what justice is, let's just go about our day and be noblemen and all this, right? They weren't quite as intellectual. But what Nietzsche, I think he's trying to say is that they had come to a point in their society where they had to be this way, right? That maybe the older Athenian culture had reached a breaking point.
Is that what we call the what is it called? The Hellenist?
The Hellenistic, right? The Hellenes, right? The Hellenistic era, right? I mean, they talk about that whole area of Greece as the Hellenes, right? After Helen from Troy or whatever, right? The Hellenic, that culture, that Greek culture that centered primarily around Athens, was coming to a close. They had pushed it to its extreme. It had become decadent. So here's where the noble morality went too far. They were just too decadent, too over the top. And Socrates was the only expedient, I guess, is kind of what Nietzsche seems to be saying, right? Let's skip that next section. So section 8, or actually let's skip a couple sections. Section 9, because I want to try to get through this today. Section 9, Nietzsche writes, but Socrates divined even more. He saw behind his aristocratic Athenians. He grasped that his case, the idiosyncrasy of his case, was already no longer exceptional. The same kind of degeneration was everywhere silently preparing itself. The old Athens was coming to an end, and Socrates understood that all the world had need of him, had need of his expedient, his cure, his personal art of self-preservation. Everywhere the instincts were in anarchy. Everywhere people were but 5 steps away from excess. The monstrum in animo was the ultimate danger. The instincts want to play the tyrant, so we have to devise a counter-tyrant who is stronger. When that physiognomist had revealed to Socrates what he was, a cave of every evil lust, the great ironist uttered a phrase that really provides the key to him. That's true, he said, but I've become a master of all of these drives, right? How did Socrates become a master of himself? His case was, after all, only the extreme case, only the most obvious instance of what at that time had become the universal exigency, that no one was any longer master of himself, that the instincts were becoming mutually antagonistic. He exercised fascination as this extreme case. His fear-inspiring ugliness expressed itself for every eye to see. He fascinated even more, it goes without saying, as the answer, as the solution, as the apparent cure for this case. So, what is Nietzsche saying about Socrates when Socrates looked inside of himself and saw that he was a cave of evil lust, vices, and all this stuff, that he had to control his instincts, right? He looked to himself and saw this, but what happened when he looked to everybody else? What did he recognize? Was he special? Was he the only one that had this problem? No. He was only the extreme example. He was probably the worst case, but everybody else, too, was just as bad. Everywhere around him, old Athens was decaying. They had taken it too far, right? This is right after the Peloponnesian War, and I probably should have said a little bit more about that at the beginning of the semester, right? Socrates is living in a time when Athens has just kind of been really, what's the word I'm looking for, kind of kicked in the balls kind of thing by the Trojans. I don't know how else to put it, but Athens is just kind of like, we're awesome, we just beat the whole Persian Empire, right? We kick butt kind of thing. And the Trojans were a part of the whole alliance, but they were kind of like, not the Trojans, the Spartans, sorry. The Spartans were like, geez, Athens is a little too big for its own good. We're intimidated by it. And they think they're awesome, and they want to control all of the Hellenic islands. So there was a big war between Sparta and Athens. And Athens thought, oh, this will be over in no time. We're so great. We're Athenians. We're the best there is at sea. We have the best navy. There's no way the Spartans could beat us. Well, after about 40 or 50 years, they got their asses handed to them. by the Spartans, right? And this really, I think, did a lot to hurt their pride. But they didn't want to acknowledge it. They were kind of still living under this fantasy that we're greater, we're better, and we're noble. But Socrates saw that it was all a facade, it was all a lie, and that we had to do something about it, or Athens would fall for sure. It's already on the way out. It's declining. It's going. We've got to do something. This is our only expedient. Dialectics, reason, as Nietzsche puts it. Right. That's our cure. But if one needs to make a tyrant of reason, as Socrates did, then there must exist no little danger of something else playing the tyrant. Rationality was at that time divine as a savior. Neither Socrates nor his invalids were free to be rational or not as they wished. It was de rigueur. It was their last expedient. The fanaticism with which the whole of Greek thought just throws itself at rationality betrays a state of emergency. One was in peril. One had only one choice, either to perish or to be absurdly rational. The moralism of the Greek philosophers from Plato downwards is pathologically conditioned. Likewise, their estimation of dialectics. Reason equals virtue equals happiness. This equation means merely that one must imitate Socrates and counter the dark desires by producing a permanent daylight, the daylight of reason. One must be prudent, clear, bright at any cost. Every yielding to the instincts, to the unconscious, leads downwards. Okay, so Socrates looks around him. He says that he sees decadence. And what is his solution to the decadence? Rationality, dialectics, okay? Well, what does that mean, decadence? What is the word decadence? Everybody's being decadent. What is on decadent? What is that? Overly indulging, right? Doing too much of some certain thing. Taking it too far, right? If I'm super decadent, I'll spend $1 million on someone's birthday or some crap like that. It's like, are you kidding me? Why did you do that? Buy him a gift or something. $1 million, right? I'd buy my kid, let's say I'm a millionaire, I'd buy him a Ferrari for their 16th birthday or something like that. I hate when I see stuff like that, right? How is the kid going to have any value of anything if you just give them all these toys and stuff? They're not going to appreciate any of it, right? So decadence was the problem. The Greeks were being decadent. They had taken that might makes right mentality, that noble morality, and just took it too far. But Nietzsche says that Socrates' solution was not really a solution to decadence. Why not? Well, he says here in the last section 11, he says, I've intimated the way in which Socrates exercised fascination. He seemed to be a physician, a savior. But is it necessary to go on to point out the error which lay in his faith in rationality at any cost? Well, it's self-deception on the part of philosophers and moralists to imagine that by making war on decadence, that they elude decadence themselves. That is beyond their powers. What they selected as an expedient, as a deliverance, is itself only another expression of decadence. They alter its expression, they do not abolish the thing itself. So Socrates was a misunderstanding. The entire morality of improvement, the Christian included, has been a misunderstanding. The harshest daylight, rationality at any cost, life bright, cold, circumspect, conscious, without instinct, in opposition to the instincts. This itself has been no more than a form of sickness, another form of sickness, and by no means a way back to virtue, to health, to happiness. To have to combat one's instincts, that is a formula for decadence. As long as life is ascending, happiness and instinct are one. So why is this not a solution to decadence? Rationality at all costs? So they're being decadent, they're following their instincts too much. So I'm going to be super rational and only go with reason and ignore my instincts at all costs. Why is that not a solution to decadence?
It's another form of it.
It's another form of decadence, right? You're not being crazy wild with your instincts, but you're being super cold. I'm rational, always have to do the right thing. And that might be absurd sometimes. Like with Kant, remember, never tell a lie, even if you have to save someone's life to do it, right? That's absurd, right? So he replaces that decadence of the nobles with this rational type of decadence. He doesn't get rid of decadence, right? And for Nietzsche, he says too, this is an interesting point, as long as life is ascending, our instincts should be all right. What is it? Our happiness and our instinct should be one, right? It's only when life is in decline, when things are going wrong, that's when we need a Socrates. So I guess Socrates himself was not the problem. He had to be there. If he didn't show up, the Greek Empire probably would have collapsed sooner, right? He allowed it to further itself a little bit longer with Plato, with this intellectual movement of philosophers. If he wouldn't have come along, it would have fallen a lot sooner. But Greece was coming to an end. It was in decline. We needed rationality. If life is ascending, the instinct should be followed. If I'm healthy and exuberant, I should follow my instincts. And so I guess the question we should ask ourselves is, do we need a Socrates or do we need an Achilles in our time, right? Are we living in a time where life is ascending or are we descending down to a spiral like something? What do you think? We can take this on an individual basis. The individual, is he doing good or she doing good in their life, or are they sort of declining? But we can also look at societies themselves as declining or ascending. What do you think? Nietzsche, when he's writing this in the late 1800s, seemed fairly optimistic. He thought, we haven't really grown up yet, but we're starting to as a species. We've kind of realized God is dead. We killed that idea. We can't come up with the perfect picture of the world, but we're still trying to pretend that we can. Maybe we can finally wake up eventually and things will be great. So he was kind of optimistic, but I don't know what he would say now about our culture. He didn't see World War I, he didn't see World War II, right? He didn't see all the stuff that we've seen in our lives. What do you think? Are we living in a time where things are ascending or descending? Or does it depend on what part of the world you're in? It's complicated.